Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of textual study of the Quran. Today we will be starting off with verse 116 of Surah al-Nisa, and this verse has a very important message to give. And this is one of the areas in the Quran in which we have been shown that if people deliberately associate partners with God, then they will have to face eternal hell, and God will not forgive any type of polytheism, any type of association, and anything less than polytheism he can forgive. However, there are other instances also in the Quran which show that as far as eternal damnation is concerned, eternal hell is concerned, not only polytheism, but there are two other crimes as well that can lead to eternal hell, and that is adultery, if a person continues to indulge in adultery, and secondly, murder. So these are the three major sins in Islam: polytheism, adultery, and murder. And all three of them are heinous crimes. Of course, we know that as far as murder is concerned, it is something that disrupts a society and makes its citizens vulnerable if it is left unchecked. Adultery is something that totally disrupts the family life, and it is something that strikes at the very base of the family system, and therefore it is also punished in a very severe way. And finally, association of partners with God, they too are absolutely, because of the fact there is no basis for associating partners with God, so therefore this has also been vehemently proscribed. So we will start off with this verse. It says, "Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bihi wa yaghfiru ma duna zalika liman yasha wa man yushrik billahi faqad dhalla dhalalan ba'ida." Thus, this is what happened, and leaving the path of faith, they have now joined the idolaters. Tell them, God shall not forgive associating partners with Him. Lesser than this, however, He will forgive according to His law whomsoever He wants. So, stay away from polytheism and remember that he who imputes partners to God has strayed far indeed. So, as far as polytheism is concerned, we know that it is a grave sin. Just discussed it. The reason being that the person has absolutely no proof of associating partners with God. If he does so, then he does so out of his own whims. And God says that if He was the only being who could have informed them if He had partners, and because He is not divulge any such information. So whatever people are doing, they are imputing falsehood to Him, and the Quran in its own expression calls this to be iftara Allah, which means that you ascribe something false to God, and this is not acceptable. So just as the source of all good is monotheism, not associating anyone in the being, attributes, rights of God, similarly the source of all evil, it seems, is polytheism, which means that you associate someone with the being, attributes, and rights of God. If a person, while adhering to monotheism, stumbles, there is a chance that this happening, if he stumbles, he will realize it and he will come back. And on the other hand, if we know that a person is adhering to polytheism, and then if he does a good deed, it's merely incidental. Its real source is not his relationship with God, the real good. For this reason, such a virtue is baseless. So, a polytheist, after severing his relationship with God, necessarily gives his reins in the hands of Satan. And thus, he gradually drifts so far away from the right path that it becomes impossible for him to return to God unless he repents from polytheism. So, we can clearly see why polytheism is an unforgivable sin in the eyes of God. And if a person commits a sin while adhering to monotheism, God will forgive him whomsoever He wants. So the important thing that we have to understand here is that it is deliberate polytheism. Willfully doing something that invokes this wrath of God. It is not any polytheism done out of ignorance or maybe a mistake, or there are other reasons also that can lead a person. But as far as this verse is concerned, it obviously speaks of the fact that a person very well knows that he should be believing in one God, but out of the fact that he thinks that his own forefathers are following a particular tradition and he has to follow the same tradition and hence stick to polytheism, then this is something which is not at all acceptable with God, and it can really lead him to this eternal damnation. إن يدعون من دونه إلا إناثا وإن يدعون إلا شيطانا مريدا. pity on them. If they do invoke someone other than God, they invoke female deities, and if they do invoke, they invoke the very Satan who has become rebellious. So obviously, this actually means that they invoke Satan for the purpose of supplication, pleading, help, appeal for mercy, the very purpose for which actually God should be invoked. And they do this by actually ascribing female deities, which means that they associate the daughters of the angels, they regard angels to be the daughters of God. This was something that was a typical belief in the case of the idolaters of Arabia, that they would regard the angels to be the daughters of God, and they would think that these angels would win them favor on the day of judgment. And so it is said that they invoke female deities and they invoke Satan. In other words, this is Satan worship or devil worship that they indulge in. And the Quran says that this is absolutely unacceptable. And hence, the very next verse says, La'anahullah, which means that cursed, illa shaitanam marida, and because of the fact that the last part of the previous verse said that they invoke Satan who has become rebellious. Marid means rebellious. And then it is said, La'anahullah, who was cursed by God. So he is someone who is cursed by God, and he was cursed because he had said, وَقَالَ لَتَّخِذَنَّ مِنْ عِبَادِكَ نَصِيبًا مَفْرُوضًا. He said that I shall grab a certain number of your people, come what may, which means that Satan had given this ultimatum. He had given this ultimatum that he is going to lead astray a large amount of people, and hence they will follow him. And the scheme of God, of course, is bound to doom, because remember, as we know, that the scheme of God that has been traced out in the Quran is that the Almighty is creating people for His paradise who would be uh, purified from inside, and He's selecting some such individuals. But Satan has challenged him at the very inception and said that, well, he will not allow a large part of these people to go to paradise, and he is going to lead them astray, and he's going to waylay them, he was going to lie in ambush for them. So one thing that is essential to know about Satan, because this is something which is discussed elsewhere also in the Quran, that is that it is not that Satan is able to lure people or inveigle them into evil forcibly. It's not that he just grabs a person by the hand and then just leads that person astray. So that is not the case. It is only that he whispers evil suggestions in the minds of people or in the hearts of people, and then the rest is something which they do, which people do. They succumb to these suggestions, they succumb to these allures, and it's not that Satan is forcibly leading them astray. Also, worthy of mention is the fact that the first Satan, or the first I mean, we know that Satan was from the jinn kind, who was called Iblis, and his name is Iblis. So that was the Satan who had refused to bow down before Adam, and he was the one who had given this challenge. So it's not necessarily, significant to important to think that he's still alive. Of course, he could have had his natural death or his natural life, whatever the life age was. But the fact is that all those who follow him in his ways, they are his progeny and they are his associates. And they are not just found in jinn kind, they are also found amongst men. And that is precisely what the last verse of the Quran and Surah al-Nas states, which says that min al-jinnati wan nas, that these devils are from among both mankind and from humankind, from jinn kind and from humankind, referring to the fact that all those who follow the evil ways of Satan and try to lead people astray, they are like his progeny and they are carrying on his mission, and in fact they are completing the mission that was actually started off by Satan. And this word actually, وَقَالَ لَتَّخَذَنَّ مِنْ عِبَادِكَ نَصِيبًا مَفْرُوضًا, is like a commitment or like a challenge which Satan has thrown towards God, and he said that I shall grab a certain number of your people, come what may. And actually, this reference to the threat of Satan has had given when he was regarded as accursed and condemned after he had arrogantly refused to bow down before Adam. And thus, we know that the nature of his or his modus operandi basically is to whisper evil, is to make them realize that they can win a lot of favor with God if they follow him. And of course, he made all kinds of promises, and those promises, as we will know from the Quran, or as we do know from the Quran, they are bound to fail. And in fact, on the day of judgment, the Quranic verse says that the promise of God would be fulfilled and the promise of Satan would absolutely be not fulfilled. And Satan would then say that I never asked you to follow me, it is you who asked, who actually started to follow me. So, فَلَا تَلُومُونِي, don't rebuke me, don't think that I am the person or I am the culprit. It is you who are the culprit because I just did my job. I just showed you some things and you succumbed to that whole vision. And now we find in the Quran some of the ways and means in which he has said that I will lead astray these people. He said, "Wala udillannahum, wala umanniyannahum, wala amurannahum, fala yubattikunna azan al-an'am, wala amurannahum, fala yughayyirunna khalqallah, wa man yattakhiz ash-shaytana waliyan min dunillahi faqad khasira khusranan mubina." So what did he say? He said, I shall definitely lead them astray, implicate them in desires, teach them so that they will slit the ears of cattle, and will teach them so that they will distort the creation of God. Tell them that he who made Satan his protector, leaving aside God, has no protection for him, so he has ended up in blatant loss. So basically, this is a reference to the false desires which polytheistic nations are often afflicted. So the belief of the Arabs that the favors of this world and the next are acquired through the intercession of their deities, and the belief of the Jews that since they are the progeny of Abraham, who is God's friend, they have been promised paradise, are examples of these desires, and that is why it says that I'm going to implicate them in their desires. So these desires are basically false desires, there are false whims, and the people of the book, they thought that because they are associated with Abraham, so there's no reason why God would punish them, and idolaters thought that this is not possible because the angels are daughters of God and they have won their favor and they will intercede for them. So that is why it is said that, well, this is something that you will always want to do, but as far as God is concerned, He has shown them the right way. And of course, Satan is trying to waylay them. He's lying in ambush for them. But if they set their sight on the final target, if they are God-fearing people, yes, they might stumble, yes, they might fall, but then they will get up again and they will rise again and they will once again tread the path of truth, even though they might have to sacrifice a lot for this, because for them, it is the life hereafter which is the real life, and if in this world they do suffer at the hands of their enemies or devils or Satan, then this is something of still a lucrative deal, because ultimately these people are going to be doomed, and the ones who are suffering, they'll succeed in the hereafter. So the way that this threat of Satan has materialized was that certain polytheistic nations, they would ceremonially dedicate certain animals to their alleged deities, and this is what we call nazar. And as a symbol of this dedication, they will slit the ears so that no one should tamper with these animals. So that is what is said here. فَلَا يُبَتِّكُنَّ آذَنَ الْأَنْعَامِ, that they will slit the ears, which means that these animals or these camels are now dedicated to their deities and no one should touch them. So therefore now they are specially dedicated for this purpose. And وَلَا أَمُرَنَّهُمْ فَلَا يُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ, which means that they will try to pervert the nature of human beings on which they have been created. They will become advocates of polytheism instead of monotheism. So one of the biggest perversions that takes place regarding Khalq Allah, or the creation of God, is that they endear polytheism and they create a lot of doubts regarding monotheism, and then as a result adopt all those things which fall under the ambit of changing their nature. For example, we know that in the case of Rahbaniya, this is something which is also against human nature. It's like remaining celibate all your lives, which is of course virtually like a fight against nature. And then men trying to imitate women and women trying to imitate men. All these things they fall under change of human nature. And obviously this is something in which you are not absolutely accepting the scheme of God. You don't think that you are a man and you are not satisfied being a man and you'd like to become a woman, and imitating a woman to the extent that you try to give this impression that you would rather be better off if you were called a woman. This is something which once again has been ascribed to Satan, that he'll try to do that, and in recent times we can see how this is very commonly happening as well. So, وَمَنْ يَتَّخِذِ الشَّيْطَانَ وَلِيًّا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ خَسِرَ خُسْرَانًا مُبِينًا, which means that tell them that he who made Satan his protector, leaving aside God, has no protection for him. So he has ended up in blatant loss. And then he goes on to say, يَعِدُهُمْ وَيُمَنِّيهِمْ, which means that he makes promises with them, وَيُمَنِّيهِمْ, and gives them hopes. Of course, here it refers to false hopes. وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا, and all these promises of Satan with them are sheer deception. I mean, he makes them promise. He promises them high ranks in the hereafter. He makes them realize that this is something that they will always gain if they follow the ways of Satan, and if anything would come their way, it will only be something of a temporary nature. If fire will touch them, it will be just temporarily, and then they will always live in paradise. So that is what is being said here. And then when it is said, وَمَنْ يَتَّخِذِ الشَّيْطَانَ وَلِيًّا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ خَسِرَ خُسْرَانًا مُبِينًا, that there are people who have in fact gained they have gained a lot of deception in this regard, and they don't realize this. So, أُولَٰئِكَ مَأْوَاهُمْ جَهَنَّمْ وَلَا يَجِدُونَ عَنْهَا مَحِيصًا. Thus, it is these people whose abode is hell, and they will find no way to escape. So, when it is said that it is these people whose abode is hell, it actually means that such people who adhere to polytheism in this way, they will never be able to escape from hell. And its feebleness is mentioned with regard to two aspects. When it is said that as far as hell is concerned, they'll not be able to escape it. And we have understood this because as far as the Quran is concerned, it gives explicit direction in this regard. So a whole system of polytheism in the times of Arabia is founded on the basis of female deities. We have just discussed this, and in the first case, it was extreme foolishness that a person seeks the support of somewhere other than God. So that is why it is said that it's totally worthlessness. But even more foolish is the fact that this support be sought from imaginary women, because it says that you would seek the support of female deities, and whose weakness and helplessness is proverbial, at least to the Arabs. And polytheism is entirely founded on the false desires and false promises of Satan. And as we can see that all these false promises are totally baseless. And when they see the reality, when they face God, ultimately they'll find that how weak they were and how wrong they were. And they will see that neither the ancestry of Abraham will be of benefit to them, nor will there be any existence of their deities like we know the Lat, Manat, and Uzza, these famous deities, which the Quran is also mentioned. At that time, when they will face the Almighty, everything will be dependent on a person's faith and deeds. So, if a person is going to be rewarded or punished, it's not going to be on the basis of these deities. People will be rewarded or punished on the basis of their own doings. And people who do not have these good deeds with them will only have hell to face, which is, of course, a very evil abode, and it's impossible to escape it. And that is why it is said, وَلَا يَجِدُونَ عَنْهَا مَحِيصًا. Thus, it is these people whose abode is hell, and they will find no way to escape from it. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ سَنُدْخِلُهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا أَبَدًا وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقًّا وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ قِيلًا. On the other hand, those who have embraced faith and have done righteous deeds, we shall soon admit them into orchards beneath which streams flow. They shall live in them forever. True is the promise of God, and who can be more truthful than God in what He says? So clearly, we can see that as far as the Quran is concerned, it tells us that the fate of the disbelievers, as we have just seen, is hell. On the other hand, people who believe, people who do righteous deeds, they will have the opposite fate. They will be admitted into paradise, and paradise is a place that will be like an orchard on a high ground below which streams will flow. And this is a typical orchard or a typical garden which the Arabs would cherish, because gardens and orchards which are placed at a height, they don't suffer from these calamities. They are not exposed to these calamities, especially floods, because now the water is flowing in a valley below them, and the orchard itself is on a high ground. And then it is said, "Wa'adallahi haqqa." True is the promise of God. It is absolutely true. And "Waman asdaqu min Allahi qila." And who else can be more truthful than God in what He says? So that is something that has to be absolutely understood. And then it said, "Laysa bi amaniyikum wala amaniyi ahlil kitab. Man ya'mal su'an yujza bihi wala yajid lahu min dunillahi waliyan wala nasira. ومن يعمل من الصالحات من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فأولئك يدخلون الجنة ولا يظلمون نقيرا." It should remain clear to you that success in the hereafter is neither dependent on your desires nor on those of the people of the book. So it's not dependent on these desires, certainly not. In fact, he who does evil will be punished for it and will find none against God to be his protector and helper. And he who does a virtue, whether man or woman, and also has faith, then such are the people who will enter paradise. So such are the people who will enter paradise of God, the paradise of God, and they will not suffer the slightest injustice. So this is a very strong statement given by the Quran, and it has been said that Satan is trying to lure people through the promises and by spinning a web of these false desires before people. But all his promises are mere deception. On the other hand, the promises of God are absolutely true, and their desires are not going to come true if they think that these desires are going to, protect them in the hereafter. If they think that they'll be able to win the protection of their deities, these angels whom they think to be daughters of God, or if they think that because of being associated with Abraham they are going to be saved, then this is not going to happen, because in the hereafter everything will be decided on merit. Everything will be decided on the basis of their doings, what they believed and what they did. That is the only reckoning which they will receive, on the basis of which they will realize that what they did in the previous world has now totally left them. So then it is said that فَأُولَٰئِكَ يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةَ وَلَا يُظْلَمُونَ نَقِيرًا. Then such are the people who will enter the paradise of God, and they will not suffer the slightest injustice. They will not suffer the slightest injustice, of course, which would mean that now they will be living in a place of bliss and joy, and they will then realize that the sacrifices that they made in the previous life have paid off completely and totally. And then it is said, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا مِمَّنْ أَسْلَمَ فَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُحِيطًا. These hypocrites give preference to the idolaters with regard to the believers, and do not understand who has a better religion than he who resigns himself to God and is one thorough in his deeds and follows the ways of Abraham, who was totally devoted. And because of this very reason, God had chosen Abraham to be his friend. Who is more worthy than God to submit oneself to? Because to God belongs all that is in the heavens and the earth, and God encompasses all things. وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ مُحِيطًا. So Abraham was its real follower. He was chosen by God to be his friend because he had totally devoted himself to him, as this verse says, that he had totally devoted himself and dedicated himself. And we know that the extreme, or the most toughest, I would say, test that he was put through, he passed that with flying colors when he was asked to slaughter his son as sacrifice. And although it was not something that was asked in a literal way, because he was shown this phenomenon in a dream, and in such cases what was actually required was to dedicate his son for the house of God, which had been built at that time. So Abraham actually literally interpreted the dream, and he started off to go on a hill, the place that we call Marwa, where he was about to slaughter his son, when God stopped him and he said, "Qad saddaqta ru'ya." Abraham, you have made the dream come true. This was not required. So once he passed through the supreme test, the Almighty said that, well, This is something that has endeared him to him, and he is now someone who is like his friend. He is the leader of Muslims as far as monotheism is concerned, and contrary to other people, and in contrary to them, the idolaters have left the way of Abraham and have now chosen to follow Satan, who is the supreme leader of polytheism. And they must realize, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, that to God belongs all that is in the heavens and the earth, and God encompasses all things. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُحِيطًا. So this brings us to an end to today's set of verses. But before we attempt its literal and idiomatic translation, if you have any questions on the part that we have studied, kindly raise them.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. That was a brilliant session. So there is a question that says, in verse 119, there is a mention of altering the structure upon which God has created mankind. It is said that on the basis of this verse, surgical contraception, which makes both male and female, as in the case, may be permanently incapable of reproduction. Is this interference in line with the provisions of the verse?
It is not. I mean, if you are trying to change the nature of something, it actually means that you're trying to pervert it. Here, if you use a contraception in a way that you permanently make one of the spouses sterile, it's not that is going against the nature of a certain thing. It's just we are stopping something from taking place. It's like stopping a happening from taking place. So that would not in any way be called as changing the hulk of God or changing the nature on which God has created human beings.
Okay. Then I have another question, Dr. Saleem, from last week, which actually pertains to this week's session. Can I ask it?
Yes, please go ahead.
So it asks, when does polytheism become unforgivable?
When it is done deliberately, when you know that God is one, and you still, out of arrogance, out of jealousy, out of tradition, you say that no, I'm going to believe in more than one God. And that is precisely what the Quran has said actually on many occasions, that when you deliberately associate partners with God, and the idolaters, why do you think they were taken to task? Why they were given this punishment of being killed? Because God says in the hereafter they'll be killed for their heinous crime, because they knew something very truly that it was not the case. They knew that God is one, but in spite of this, they believed in many gods. So that is what makes it a sin, that you do it deliberately, intentionally, and knowingly.
Okay. Then I have another question. Does critically understanding Quran, as Orientalist scholars do, considered under the category of whispers of shaitan?
Under the category of what? Whispers of shaitan? No,
The
not at all. I
whispers of
mean,
shaitan.
if the Orientalist scholars are studying the Quran, I didn't get the other part. What would
Okay.
that be?
Does critically understanding Quran, as Orientalist scholars do, considered under the category of
Okay.
whispers of shaitan?
It's not. I mean, it all depends what do you mean by critically understanding. If you are, I mean, if you're trying to find out the true meaning, and that is only done through critical appreciation of the language itself, and of course by comparing various translations, that is absolutely fine. However, if you have preconceived notions and you're trying to inject them in the Quran and then start to criticize it, it's of course something that is unbecoming. It's not only against wrongly understanding a text like the Quran, it would be against understanding any text. So when you go into a text, you have to go with a clean mind, and you must derive whatever you understand from the Quran, and that would be absolutely fine. And there are many Orientalist scholars who have tried to do so, and there may be others who have not tried to do so. So I will not give a blanket statement. All that I can say is that if you are trying to get after the meaning of the Quran by critically reviewing other translations and tafsirs and trying to get to the bottom of the interpretation or translation of a verse, then that is precisely what is required actually.
So basically, it is based a lot on intention. Is that, would we say?
Yes, it is
If you're
based
trying
on
to
intention
intentionally.
and competence also. I mean, if you are trying to interpret the Quran, then you have to have that sufficient competence as well, in which you are going to form an opinion. For that, you need to have a comprehensive knowledge of Arabic and some of the other branches of Arabic as well. So, if that is the case, then I mean, even if you falter, we know from the Quran that trying your best and faltering after that is something which will be forgiven by God, because you tried your best, you had the competence, you had the sincerest of intentions, But in spite of that, you could still have faltered. And that is what we call human error.
Okay. So we will be moving on. If there are any questions, please raise your hands or text them to me in the chat. If not, then we'll be moving on. So Dr. Saleem, it seems that people don't
Okay.
have questions right now. We'll move on.
So I'm just going to now do the idiomatic and literal translation of the passage that we have just studied. This is once again starting from verse 116. Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka. Inna indeed, Allah, God, la not, yaghfiru, forgive, an yushraka bihi, that partners be associated with him. Wa, and yaghfiru, will forgive, ma duna zalik, what is lesser than this, liman yasha, for whomsoever he wants. Obviously, this whomsoever he wants always refers to the fact that his own intention is based on his laws of justice. So, idiomatically or literally, it would mean that indeed God not forgive partners be associated with him, but forgive less than this for whomsoever he wants. This is literal. But idiomatically, of course, it would be that God shall not forgive those who associate partners with him, and anything less than this he will forgive for whomsoever he wants. وَمَنْ يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ ضَلَّ ضَلَالًا بَعِيدًا. Wa, and man he yushrik billah, associates partners with God, faqad, then, dhalla, gone astray, dhalalam ba'ida, in a very far way. So literally it would be that he who associated partners with God, then he gone astray very far. And idiomatically it would be that he who has he who associate partners with God, then he has gone very far astray. That is how we would do it idiomatically. In yad'una min dunihi illa inasa. In yad'una, so in is not. Here it is what we call the in of negation. Not yad'una, they call out. Min dunihi, except him. Illa, then again, this is also a particle of exception. Except inasa, women. So they do not call other than him except women. That is what the literal translation would be. Then idiomatically it would mean that they call anyone, they do call women anyone except than him, which means that they do not call anyone but women except God, which another word means that basically they are invoking female deities. Wa, and in not, yad'una, they call upon it actually, illa, except, shaitana, Satan, marida, rebellious. So, and they do not call except the rebellious Satan, or idiomatically it would mean that they do not call upon anyone except the rebellious Satan, which means that they worship Satan, which is of course called devil worship, and they worship deities like the angels who they regarded to be daughters of God. La'anahullah, curse of God be him, who was cursed by God actually. This is referring to Satan. Wa, and qala, he said, la'attakhizanna, I shall definitely grab, min ibadika, from your servants, nasiba, a share, mafruda, fixed. So literally it would mean, and he said, I shall definitely grab from your servants share definite, which means that I shall definitely grab a certain number of people, whatever happens. And it continues after that. Wa, and la udillannahum, I shall definitely lead them astray. Wala umanniyannahum, and I shall make them inflicted with desires. Udillannahum, I shall lead them astray. Umanniyannahum, I shall make them afflicted with desires. Wa, and la'amurannahum, I shall advise them. Fala yubattikunna, and they will as a result slit azana, the ears, al-an'am, of beasts or of animals. So idiomatically it would mean that I shall definitely lead them astray, and I shall definitely make them inflicted with their desires, and I shall definitely advise them that they should cut the ears of their animals. Wala amurannahum, and I shall advise them. Fala yughayyirunna, so therefore they'll end up changing khalqallah, the creation of God. So I shall definitely advise them, and the result of this advice would be that they will end up perverting or distorting the creation of God. Khalqallah, the creation of God. Wa, and man he, yattakhizish shaitana, waliya, who makes Satan his wali, who makes Satan his friend. Min dunillahi, leaving aside God. So he who makes Satan his friend, leaving aside God, faqad khasira, faqad therefore, khasira khusrana mubina, he went into a great loss. So khasira khusrana mubina is a Arabic term or an Arabic construction, in fact, which signifies great loss. So he who made Satan his friend, he ended up in a great loss. And mubina, of course, is something which is blatant, something is very visible. Ya'iduhum. Ya'iduhum means that Satan makes promises with them. Wa and yumannihim, and he makes in them or creates in them desires, or in fact, here it actually means he creates in them false hopes. Wa and ma not. Ya'iduhum, his promise or the promise of shaitan. Ya'iduhum shaitan, and the promises of Satan, illa except gurura, fraud. And the promises of Satan are nothing but fraud, nothing but deception. Ulaika, they, ma'wahum, their abode, Jahannam, hell. So their abode is hell, their resting place is hell. Wa and la, not. Yajiduna, they will find. Anha, from it. Mahisa, any escape. And they will not be able to find any escape from it. They'll not be able to exit from hell in any way. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ سَنُدْخِلُهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي wa and الَّذِينَ, those who amanu, professed faith, wa and amilus salihat, did righteous deeds, sanudkhiluhum, we shall indeed admit them, jannat, in orchards, tajri, flow. Tajri min is actually one word. Tajri min would mean flow. Tahtiha, beneath them. Al anhar, streams. So anhar basically is the plural of nahar, and nahar of course is a stream. Tahtiha al anhar would mean below that orchard are streams. Khalidina fiha, khalidina forever, fiha in it. So they'll remain forever in it. And abada is also forever. So the word khalidina and abada, they mean the same, and they have occurred as a stress to one another. Emphasis is being laid by adding one more word of the same meaning. Khalidina fiha abada, they'll remain in it forever. Wa'dallahi haqqa. So wa'dallah, God's promise. Haqqa, true. God's promise is true. Wa and man, who, astaqu, more truthful, minallahi, than God, qila, as far as promise is concerned. So who is more truthful than God as far as the promise is concerned, or as far as whatever has been committed is concerned? Laysa bi amani yikum, laysa, not, bi amani yikum, on the desires, on your desires. Wa and, so referring to the fact that neither the desires of the idolaters, wala amani yi ahlil kitab, neither the desires of the ahlil kitab, of the people of the book. So it is neither on your desires nor on the desires of the people of the book. It's not going to happen like that. Man ya'mal su'an, man, he, ya'mal, does, su'an, bad, yudza bihi, shall be rewarded as such. So he who does a bad thing will be rewarded accordingly. Wala yajid lahu, wa and la, not, yajid, he will find, lahu, for himself, min dunillahi, except God, waliyan, friend, wa and la, not, nasira, helper, and he will not find anyone except God to be his friend and his helper. So in other words, he who does evil, he shall be rewarded for that evil, and he will find none except God to be his friend and his helper, and will find none against God to be his protector, which means that against God, none will be his protector, none will be that person's helper. So wala yajid lahu min dunillah would mean that he will not find any wali or any nasir, any friend or any helper against God. Min dunillah, against God. Wa and man, he, ya'mal, did, minas salihat, of righteous deeds, min, from among, zakar, male, aw, or unsa, female. So he who did righteous deeds, whether he belongs to a man or a woman, whether that person is a man or a woman, wa huwa mu'minun, wa and huwa, he, mu'min, believer, while he is a believer. I mean, it does not matter whether that person is a man or a woman as long as he is a believer. فَأُولَٰئِكَ, therefore for him, يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةَ, يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةَ, such are the people who will enter paradise. فَأُولَٰئِكَ, these are the people, يَدْخُلُونَ, who will enter al-Jannah, paradise. Wa, and la, not. Yuzlamuna, suffer injustice. Naqira, the slightest. So this is the literal translation, and idiomatically it would mean that he who does righteous deeds, whether he belongs to a male or a female species, so whether a man or a woman, as long as he is mu'min, then such people will enter paradise. فَأُولَٰئِكَ يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةَ, they will enter paradise. Wa, and la yuzlamuna naqira, and not the slightest injustice will they suffer. Wa man ahsanu deenan mimman aslama wajhahu lillahi wa huwa muhsin wattaba'a millata Ibrahim hanifa. Wa, and man who, ahsan, better, deenan, with regards to religion, mimman, from that, who, or from him who, aslama, submitted, wajhahu, his face, lillah, towards God. So literally it would mean who, and he, and who better with regard to religion than him who submitted his face to God. That is literal. But who has a better religion than he who resigns himself to God? That is what is meant literally. Then who has a better religion than the person who resigns himself or submits himself to God? Of course, wajhahu lillah literally means the face of God, and here it actually means the countenance of God, or someone who resigns himself to God's pleasure and his will. Wa huwa muhsin, wa, and huwa, he, muhsin, he is thorough. So a person who is muhsin actually means a person who is thorough in his deeds. Wa, and ittaba'a, followed, millata Ibrahim, the way of Ibrahim, Hanifa, who was totally devoted. So idiomatically it would mean that who would have a better religion than he who submitted himself to God such that he was thorough, and he followed the millat of Ibrahim, he followed the way of Ibrahim, who was dedicated, Hanifa, who was totally dedicated, and of course referring to the fact that he was dedicated and devoted to God. وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا. Wa, and اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ, and God made Ibrahim, Abraham, Khalila, his friend, and God made Abraham his friend. Wa, and lillahi, to God belongs, ma, that, fi, in, as-samawat, heavens. Wa, and ma, that, fi, in, al-ard, the earth, and to God belongs what is in the heavens and the earth. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُحِيطًا. Wa, and kana is Allah, God, bikulli, to every, shay'in, thing, muhita, surrounding, and God is everything surrounding, actually meaning the fact that God is surrounding everything, and in other words, God is encompassing everything, which in other words means that nothing is beyond his grasp. He knows everything and he encompasses everything. So with this we come to the end of today's literal translation and idiomatic translation also. So if you have any questions regarding what we have studied today, please raise them. Otherwise, we can have some general questions.
So, Dr. Saleem, I have a couple of questions in the chat.
Go ahead.
Shaving beard, is it against fitrat?
It is not. Shaving your beard is not fitrat at all. It's not against fitrat. It's like the hair that is grown, and it's entirely up to you. It's like it's the same as shaving your head. Whether you would like to shave your head or not, that's your choice.
Okay. Then there's another one. If someone is born into Hindu religion and continue to practice Hinduism because his parents and her parents did the same, and of course worshipping idols, is that considered deliberate and hence punishable?
So you see, this brings us to a very fundamental question: that what exactly is the responsibility of a person who is born in amongst people who have a different religion? So regardless of whether a person is born a Muslim or born a Hindu or born a Jew or born a Christian or born amongst any religious denomination, there is one responsibility which every single human being has, and that is quest for the truth. Quest for the truth, to find out what he is believing is really true or not, which means that he critically evaluates his concepts. So if a Hindu critically evaluates his concepts, and so does a Jew, and so does a Muslim, so that is what is required. And that would actually mean that the search for truth is something that should be the real objective of every single human being. Thus, for example, if a person is born in a Hindu family, then they have to realize that as far as Hindu family is concerned, screen, that this is something, I mean, this is not something which is absolutely condemnable, because now he, as a searcher for the truth, as a person who is going to inquire after the truth, is always someone who is going to review the truths that are available to him. So just to give you this example, that in the case of a non-Muslim, whether he belongs to any religion, the question that should come before his mind or his own situation is that there is a group of people in this world who think that they have the message of God with them, and they think that they have that message in its original authentic form. So now what should happen is that they should at least review or evaluate if the people who are saying so are true or not. So if a Hindu has this time, I mean, what he should do is he should actually once in his lifetime evaluate that if someone else other than him is claiming to have the message of God, and that too in its authentic form. Now, this is not a very ordinary claim, it's a very large claim. So, to at least give ear to that claim, to at least find out whether that claim is, he might reject that claim ultimately. He might end up saying that, well, I have examined this claim and I don't feel that they are true. In that case, he'll have a pretext before the Almighty of following his own religion. But if he is careless, he does not even have the inkling to find what the truth is, and he does not even care if there are people in this world who claim to be God's last bearers of message, and without even evaluating them, he dismisses them. Then the onus of that would lie on him. So you see, we have to understand this, that every single person is on this quest for the truth, is this on the path of quest for the truth. And that truth is something that he is to critically find out and evaluate. And once he has done sufficient for that, if he's done sufficiently enough to do what or find out what the truth is, and for example, he ultimately ends up following whatever faith he was following, then I think that is something that will give that person the pretext before the Almighty. But one thing is something which the Quran has said, that as far as people who deviate from the truth is concerned in such a way, then they should have a mighty big excuse. For example, about shirk or polytheism, the Quran says that the Almighty took this promise from all the souls before they were sent in this world, that God is one. Alastu bi rabbikum, and they said that, am I not your Lord? And everyone replied that, yes, we acknowledge you as your Lord. So basically what God is saying, that this affirmation or acknowledgement of one God is found in human intuition, in every single person's human intuition. And for example, if a Hindu or a person who believes in polytheism has a different notion, then it has to be searched into, because God says that unless your nature is perverted, then with a non-perverted nature, monotheism is the real thing that is found in your own soul. But now, for example, if we find a different solution or a different situation, so that is only the case in which their nature has been perverted. So for a person whose nature has been perverted such that he believes in more than one God, as I said, it is that quest for the truth that would be the ultimate deal breaker or decider as far as his faith is concerned, if he ends up following the same faith.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Saleem. So I have a couple of questions regarding the passage. So in the beginning, you said that the Gunai Kabira are adultery, murder, and of course polytheism. Then what is suicide? Suicide, does it fall under murder?
Of course, I mean, you are murdering your own self. You see,
So
murder could be of other people or murder could be your own self. So suicide is just self-murder.
okay, because okay, so it's been explained away in the West very easily, because when we move from the East to the West, we obviously carry the notion that suicide is one of the big sins. But of course, as we move towards the West, that's completely been changed. Another question I had was, so what about people who are transgender and people who think that they are women and they dress up like that? That's been explained away with mental health also. So
Yes.
how does one really understand where to draw the fine
So,
line?
I mean, you can clearly see that this is what the Quran has just said, that one of the false desires which Satan will inculcate in human beings is to uh, is men not being satisfied that they are men, and women not being satisfied they are women, and they would like to be the opposite gender. So, I mean, to be a man or a woman is not something what you think about your own self. It's a biological reality. I mean, if you are a biological man, you just cannot pretend to be a woman, and vice versa. But today, with this concept in which a person is given the choice to determine his own gender, his gender inclination, or her gender inclination, is clearly something that is amounting to following the desires of Satan, and it is something in which you are perverting your nature, and you're not accepting the nature, or you're not accepting the gender on which God has created you. So, if you're a biological man and a biological woman, that would mean that God has created you in the fold of a man or a woman, and you have to stay content with that and accept your role in whatever gender you have been created.
So, in a sense, it seems that a lot of the major sins from the Quran or from the holy books have been explained away by the creation of the bigger picture of the mental health trauma, which could be real or vague, because then there's no way to determine it, it seems, because
So that is
anything can be
why, I
explained
mean,
away.
a lot of things will be decided on the day of judgment. In this world, what we can do is at best decide things on their face value. And at times that could be correct, at that times it could not be correct. I mean, that is why we say that this is, I mean, all that we can get is a slight semblance of justice in this world. And that is
Okay.
how we will be decided, I mean, we will be judged. But in the hereafter, all these pretexts, all these excuses will go away, because it would be God there judging all of us, and He knows what is in our hearts.
Okay, thank you. So I have one raised hand. We seem to be, we have a lot of time right now. So if anybody who has any questions, the floor is open for either, first of all, asking questions regarding the passage. If not, then I'm going to open the floor for open questions. So first is Rafia, Pakistan. Please, you can ask your question.
Um, Dr. Shehzad, what I wanted to ask you was that there are some people who medically they have problems with their sex, and they do go through a lot of pain, and then eventually they are diagnosed. They have surgery, and sometimes parents get such boys married, and it is a total disaster. So these things do exist on medical grounds where a man realizes that he is a man in a woman's body. How would you treat such a person? You can't.
I mean,
Would you say that Satan is driving him to it? Because I have seen in families where there are existing problems like that. The parents are devastated, but it's a reality.
yes, it is a reality, and I mean, yes, it is a situation in which you have given your own self to your own whims and desires, because you are denying a biological reality. I mean, this is as blatant a reality as denying the sun, the midday sun was shining bright. So if you have male sexual organs, or if you have female sexual organs, how can you, I mean, just say that this is not the truth? I mean, the truth is what you see, not what you perceive, or not what you think. So we don't have a choice in this regard. So you see, the problem here is that people who believe in this, they think that they have a choice, and they think that free will is something that is given to them, and if they have this prerogative, then they can exercise this free will. So it's just a question of what importance and what final decision to give regarding what you have been on the grounds that have been created. For example, if you have been created biologically as in a particular gender, then that is something of a reality that you have to accept. And people think that this is like forcing themselves to accept a certain reality, whereas of course it's not being forced upon them. It's something that, I mean, they have been given. It's like saying that, for example, if you have a fair color, you say, no, I would not like to have a fair color, I would like to be treated as a person of color. So, I mean, how can a person who's fair colored be willfully treated as a person with color? In that case, I mean, your eyesight is going to falter. How are you going to deny what your eyes are seeing? I mean, if a person says that I have a very fair hue, and please don't call me a fair person, and I am a person with a colored, I have a color, or I have a some sort of a hue which is not white or which is not fair. It's exactly the same. So the thing is that in our Western society or the Western approach of things, people are the greatest thing which the people have is the freedom to choose whatever they'd like to be. I mean, not just in this case, but the freedom as long as it does not in any way hamper or obstruct the freedom of others. So, because this has become a value in the West that as long as you're not hampering any other person or impeding any other person, you are free to choose for your own self whatever religion, whatever caste, whatever creed, and whatever you would like for your own self. Because of the fact that this value has been inculcated so strongly that now that people have started to say these things, now they just cannot, I mean, say anything to them because this is the freedom that they had initially given, that everyone has the right to choose any life for himself as long as that life is not impeding or hampering the life of other people. So it's like being caught in something that they have already allowed, and now they are finding no way out to it. So I think it's just a question of realizing that we are given freedom, but that freedom is not unbridled, it's not unbounded, it's not unlimited. We are given freedom with respect to certain coordinates, and we have to respect those parameters and coordinates.
But Dr. Shehzad, how do you explain even in Pakistan these eunuchs, these hijras you find on the road? I mean, they have serious problems of living peacefully. They are attacked.
I
They
mean,
they do have problems.
this is another problem. You see, people who behave as hermaphrodites is the right word, which means that I mean, the way they have been created, there's no exact biological decision that has been made in their favor regarding one gender. So they are, it's like being biologically ambiguous. So in that's a different situation. That's a different scenario. So we must separate the two scenarios. One is that you are biologically absolutely born a man, and you say, no, I'm not going to accept it. I'm a woman, and it's like a woman soul being trapped in a man's body. That's a question that relates to your perception. But hermaphrodites, they are people who are born with ambiguous organs, and amongst them we know that they are born basically either with male traits or with female traits. So, I mean, but they are not fully female or not. They are not fully male. So, being a hermaphrodite is like being having a third gender. That is perhaps the right word for it. And for such people, obviously, our fiqh or Muslim jurisprudence says that people who are more inclined towards a male, a sort of a male hormone, we can say this word, then they will be treated in, for example, laws of inheritance or other things as males, and vice versa as well. So this is like a verdict that they have given. And in this case, as I said, it's not a question of they imagining something, that they are something else and now they're imagining to be someone else. That was the previous case. In this case, they are born with this biological ambiguity. I mean, they're not fully male and they're not fully female. So in such a case, of course, they have to be treated, as I said, the way our jurisprudence tells us. And the other thing that has been added in the streets of Pakistan, in many third world countries, is that they have taken to beggary, they have taken to all sorts of, I mean, strange activities, which have dumped them and labeled them in a strange way. But if you look at the rest of the world, you'll not find them doing such things. It's just that they have used this handicap and made it a means to beg people for beggary, just as we find many beggars who are physically actually handicapped. Maybe they are lame or they might be blind. So just as they use that handicap to beg before people, so in a similar way, being made in this situation that they are biologically not distinct, they use this as a means to further their beggary. So I think that has to be curbed at the state level, and that must be taken notice of at the state level, that if they are born with this ambiguous gender, then and also let me tell you that today, in today's world, in the last maybe 30 or 40 years, there have been surgeries, successful surgeries, in which at times these ambiguities have been removed. They have been removed. For example, an ambiguous male was converted into a full male, or an ambiguous female was converted into a proper female, or would kind of happen vice versa as well. Surgeries have made that possible also. But then there is a very difficult sort of a gender, which is in Arabic it's called khunsa mushkil, which means that the traits of a male and a female are so closely enwrapped in a person, and it's like having a 50-50 sort of a thing. You're 50% male and a 50% female. So in such a case, no biological operation at times is possible to tilt towards a single gender. So that is proper, what we can call to be a third gender, and of course there are ways and means to treat it. But as I said, the way they have behaved in third world countries by taking to beggary, that should be treated as a separate thing, and that should not. I mean, they should not be allowed to do that.
Dr. Shehzad, I just want to tell you an incident. This is a part of a distant relative in the family where we all knew that this boy was gay. He had a partner in London who died and he came home, and his parents just decided, okay, I think we'll get him married and then everything will be sorted out. And I know that because I attended the wedding, and the rest of the family, we all were talking. The boy resisted. He said, I don't want to get married. I'm not interested. But the families and the parents insisted. The marriage lasted one night. And the parents had a breakdown. The boy had a breakdown. He's under psychiatric treatment. So I just, you see these things happening, and you sometimes wonder that there must be some some reason why they become gay or lesbians. So we can't really deny that this doesn't exist.
Right.
This is what
So
I was wanting to.
actually, what we have to understand here is that I mean, it has to be understood that you cannot force a person to marry if he's not willing to marry. And the case that you have described here is one such mishandling. If that person had no inclination towards a woman and he did not want to marry, it was the parents who wrongly thought that if he would get married, maybe the inclination would come back to him, and this ruined, I mean, the whole marriage, as you have said, just in just one night. So the bottom line is that marriage is, as it takes place through the consent of adult individuals. It must not be forced down upon them. People must not be forced to accept partners that they don't want. So if you start doing that, then this is inevitable what resulted. So,
No,
and
sorry, Dr.
yes,
Shehzad, they thought he was gay, and they maybe by the marriage, once he has a wife and fulfills all that,
that's what
he
I'm
might
saying.
become. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That if that was a thought that had taken place, either it was an error of judgment, or it was something that they should not have done actually. If you, I mean, at times, whether a person is attracted to the same gender does not become fully evident unless a person gets married. I mean, there have been cases in which this unattraction came to the fore after marriage. I mean, for various reasons. And many a time, this is something that can be diagnosed or can be known before a person gets married. So I'm talking about the situation in which if a family knows this, then it would not be correct to get that person married, because after all, he does not have any inclination towards the opposite gender. Then he has to be taken as a celibate, maybe a person who never marries and could use other means of self gratification to release his sexual desire. But as far as I mean, marriage is concerned, in which the two get married and later on after marriage, one of the partners declares or feels that he is or she is attracted to the same gender, then this is a purely an accident that has occurred, and this could not have been helped because it never got diagnosed before marriage. So in such a situation, a dissolution of marriage is the only solution, is the only option, and has to be accepted.
A second
Thank you so
question, if
much.
I can, sorry, can I just ask one more
Okay.
question?
Rafiq, I'm going to, I'll come back to you in the end. Maybe I have a couple of questions in the chat and maybe somebody else wants to ask a question. So I'll come back to
May
you
I
in the end.
quickly just ask, if you just give me a chance, this has been on my mind. Dr. Shehzad, because of the conflict, Israel and the Jewish hatred, we have very close friends who own the franchise for McDonald's and also some friends who own for KFC. Now, people are boycotting it because, wo to Jewish hai. But these poor Pakistani friends are just losing their business because of this attitude. How would you
I think
think about
I've
it?
commented on this on various occasions, and I've said that this can only be effective if governments take this decision, and that too against people who support whatever Israel is doing. I mean, how do you know that even if a person who owns McDonald's, a chain of McDonald's, not in Pakistan, anywhere in the world, are you sure that these are the people who are always supporting what is going on in Israel? I mean, there are so many Jews, even if it is accepted, who are not even in favor of what's going on. So first of all, you must diagnose the problem and its base. That you have to understand if, well, there is a political I mean, there's a certain outlet which is of a food outlet, it could be a clothing outlet, it could be any outlet, and you think that particular person who's earning from that outlet and has a global chain is financing, for example, Israelites. So unless you have that, I mean, that diagnosis, and then the next thing is that governments and Muslim governments, for example, or a country decides that at the Ummah level, all of us will boycott such a person who's financing Israel, then it might a little bit seem acceptable. Otherwise, less than that, whatever you're going to do, either you're going to make a wrong conclusion by thinking that a certain chain is financing them, whereas it might never be financing them. And secondly, if it is in in a third world country like Pakistan, where are the revenues going? And they're not going to Israel mostly. They are basically going in the pockets of the franchise people. So I think that all these things have to be considered, and to me, it seems to be a little childish to boycott such things. I mean, it's not going to make any impact. It's not going to have any effect unless it is done at the ummah level, and that too, when you are able to diagnose whether the person that you're boycotting or the chain that you're boycotting is actually also responsible for those atrocities.
Thank
Thank you
you
so
very
much, Dr.
much.
Saleem. Thank you.
Sorry I took so much time, Bisma.
Yeah, it'll be if we can all consider everyone in the chat right now and all the participants. We're limited on time, so if everybody can get a chance,
Thank you.
that'll be wonderful.
Sorry.
That's perfectly fine, Rafia. Abdul Rahman, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Morning, sir. Sir, my question is regarding established history. I will just give the context in which I'm asking this question. Oriental scholars say that there is the hadith is not independently verifiable, right? So my question is the letters. I mean, as a nation state, the Prophet sent some letters to the Persian Empire and to the Roman Empire. Where are those letters in the Persian history and the Roman history? I mean, why don't we find easily those letters with them?
Why don't we find letters with them? So, I
In their
mean, this
history.
is in their own history. So, I think that this is
Yeah.
something of a. I mean, it's not the only thing that is that weakens these letters is that yes, had we found these letters in their history, it would have been a corroboration to a very fine extent. But in the absence of any corroboration from their own history, if we have found these letters in our own history, I mean, see, what we have to understand is history is not something that is owned by a couple of people, or it's not like a monopoly. It's like a report that is being sent out. And if that report is being sent out by in any denomination, the real thing should be to evaluate that report on merit rather than to find out whether that corroboration exists or not. Yes, in the presence of that corroboration, something becomes very definitive. But an absence of corroboration does not mean that it never got reported, because you see these things which are basically part of our history. Many times we find that when histories are written, there are things that are left out of history, especially if they relate to things that undermine your own status as a nation. So, and there are other reasons as well. So, what I'm saying is that in the absence of any such corroboration, it does not weaken the case of the letters that were written. Yes, in the presence of that corroboration, it would have strengthened a lot, but a lack of that mention does not necessarily mean that the ones that do mention it, then they lack that authenticity, because as we see that authenticity has based on the Quran basically, and the way that those letters whatever they say, if you look at the statements of these letters, it's very close to what the Quran has said, and it is the same punishment that was meted out to the idolaters and the people of the Book of Arabia. And we know that the Byzantines and the Persian empires, both these empires, they were basically regarded to be the people of the book, especially the Byzantines because they were the Romans, and they were treated in the same way as the way the people of the Book of Arabia were treated. So, if we look at the content of the letter with respect to its authenticity, besides the ascription way, which is the isnad, we find it to be quite closely based on what the Quran has said. So that is, I would say, the reason that in spite of these letters not having corroboration in their history, they still have that value of authenticity.
Sir, just to follow up on this, but if somebody wants to independently verify these letters. They have no other source except Muslim history, right? So there should be
Right.
some way to verify
Well,
this
you see, as I said, there
this
are so
history.
many things in history. There are so many things in history who either get lost because of a bad reporting or they are deliberately deleted. I mean, you know that there have been instances in which histories have been written by kings and people who are monarchs, and when they feel that anything which is going to undermine their position, is going to relegate them back, it's not going to augur well for them, then these things are omitted entirely. So these things have happened in history as well. So what I'm saying is that in the absence of any such mention, it does not mean that the case becomes weak. It only means that either they could have become lost, either or they could have been deliberately deleted, or some other thing could have happened, and maybe also that the person who is searching still needs to search more. So all these options are still available.
Okay,
Thank you
sir.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Shabana Ansari, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम।
डॉक्टर साहब, ये जो आपने बताया कि हम उन जानवरों के कान चीरने और उसमें तगय्युर करने की जो बात आई है, तो ये शिर्क की वजह से ये सारा कुछ करते थे ना, तो
Correct.
इसलिए मना है।
Correct.
वरना जैसे आजकल के उलमा दूसरे गामदी साहब के अलावा जो है वो ये कहते हैं कि अपने चेहरे पे और उसमें जो ब्यूटीफाई कराने के लिए नोज जॉब और खूबसूरत करने के लिए जो सर्जरी प्लास्टिक सर्जरी वगैरह होती है वो उसको भी यूं उसमें हराम करा देते हैं। तो ये तो सिर्फ उस शिर्क की वजह से है ना?
Yes, that should not be any case of concern in that, because you see there is one thing which is called aesthetically beautifying yourself, and another thing is that you either deceive people because of those aesthetics, or you have something associated or some evil belief associated with that makes it false. So that cannot in any way be regarded as فَلَا يُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So, Dr. Saleem, I have a couple of questions in the chat. Are all the trials Allah puts us through for the sake of our moral development alone, or does Allah give us trial that will develop us in matters of dunya too?
I mean, it's
So
both.
they're asking-
So there are a number of reasons because of which we are put through trials. At times, it is to equip us, to make us realize that we have these latent, hidden potentials that need to be called to the surface, so that in future, if we are passing through some difficult test, we have the reserves right at our disposal. So at times, these trials come to make us internally strong. And we know that when we pass through a trial, when we come out of it, we feel more mentally and morally strong. This is one reason. Then another reason is that these trials, they are meant to bring a person closer to God, because when you're passing through testing times, you tend to remember God more. Similarly, at times it could be the fact that you have done something wrong and God would like to punish you in this world for that wrongdoing. So these are some of the reasons for which trials come. But we cannot pinpoint that, well, this trial came because of this reason and that trial came because of that reason, because these are the possible reasons that we know through the Quran. But we cannot single out which trial came through because of which reason. That only God knows. So the right way would be to go through these trials to think that they have come from God and there must be some good hidden in us, in them for us. And one of the things that you can think of is maybe that God is trying to purge me of something that I did wrongly, or God is trying to make me strong so that I can bear any further trial that might come my way, and also that this is an opportunity for me to come closer to God. So this is like introspectively thinking that if I'm passing through a trial, then this is how I should behave. But as I said, I cannot pinpoint which trial has come for which reason. For that, I would need God's help, and which, of course, in the absence of the institution of Wahi or divine revelation, you have no access to.
Okay, so I have a comment in the chat. Dr. Saleem, I was just wanting to get your view on it. Please read, I think it's regarding the question the gentleman had asked before, so another person has commented. Please read the book Covenants of Prophet Muhammad, Christian World by John Andrew Morrow. You will find the picture of the actual letters in Arabic. What is your comment on that? So do those letters
Well,
exist?
I cannot say. I mean, we do know that Dr. Hamidullah has discovered these letters that were sent, and these letters were because once again, a person could make this case that he's a Muslim, and therefore, how can we trust them? But if you look at some of the endeavors that have been done by Dr. Hamidullah, I'm aware of that, you'll find out that he has tried to discover those original letters. And that again would be something that is from the Muslim side. But if the person has said that there is a corroboratory evidence in some other history book, then I would need to look at it to verify it. But that would mean that if the claim that he is making is true, then in essential we would be having that corroboratory evidence that our gentleman was asking on earlier.
Yeah.
Islam
Okay. So,
but in this, I'm sorry to butt in. I actually have this book and I've read this book and I actually put a picture in there too because their letters, pictures of letters in Arabic in that old style still exist there. Thank you. Sorry.
No, that's if that is the picture, I mean, that's a slightly different thing. So the person who was asking this question was that have these letters been reported in the histories of the Persian or the Byzantine empires? So this would mean that, I mean, these are sources that we know, but have these letters being discovered in their own sources, because they also wrote their own histories. So they must have they must be having it in Persian or in Latin or whatever language that they spoke. So yes, the letters were in Arabic, but they should be found in their own histories the way we find them in our history. So I think that was the question.
yes.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you, Dr.
That
Saleem.
was actually my question. Yeah. Sorry
Yeah.
to chime in.
Yeah. Imran, if you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. Just a quick
Walaikum.
question. We wanted to get clarification on that ayah where the people would make cuts on their, cattle or animals. How is that connected to the shirk? That's number one. And number two, if you can shed light on the plastic surgeries and stuff, if they are indeed haram, and the concept behind it. So thank you.
So you see, the people would slit the ears of animals. They would actually think that these animals are dedicated to their deities. And so we had a clear concept of polytheism that was running through them. So that is why it was said that because these animals have been dedicated to their deities and they should not be tampered with, they should not be touched, no one should ride them, they are for their deities. So that we know is a concept that is related to polytheism. And as far as plastic surgery is concerned, anything that you do for your own beautification, as long as that beautification is not to deceive people or hide something that you have and that should be disclosed. Other than that, it's like a scientific advancement that is now available to you, especially when there are accidents in which a person, maybe he might lose his ear or his nose or any vital organ which can be replaced. That also is plastic surgery. But plastic surgery for the purpose of beautification, for a facial uplift, as they say, of course, I don't think there's anything wrong as long as you are not, just trying to deceive people, because this is something that can be used to deceive people about your age, about your own background, etc. If you clearly tell people, well, all that we are doing is to make ourselves look good. I mean, the way women embellish their hair, or men would wear certain other things to embellish themselves, and people know that, well, this is not something that is originally with them. It's like something they have added to their own apparel. So it would seem fine to me. It's like a scientific advancement that has been made available, and you're just trying to make use of it.
I see. So thank you. We're staying on topic, right? I can wait till the next.
You can ask a question, open forum question. I've opened the forum because I don't have any raised hands right now.
Okay.
So if you want to ask
just quickly, thank you about the first interaction of the Prophet ﷺ in Ghar Hira with Jibreel alayhi salam. How is clenching him or hugging him tightly allowed the Prophet to then understand when he kept saying Iqra bismi rabbikal ladhi khalaq. The first two times Prophet couldn't say it, and the third time. So what is the concept behind it?
I've tried to explain that this whole incident of Hira, the way it has been reported in Bukhari, has a lot of questions, and it has been these questions have been raised by Ustaz Javed Ghamidi. He's written in detail and given lectures also. I have also given some lectures on this topic. It may well be, if you could look them up, and they have been published also. The bottom line is that this incident actually took place in a dream. It was not a physical clenching of or hugging of the Prophet, and we find a whole series of narratives in the Seerah of Ibn Hisham telling us that this was not something that literally that took place actually, or it happened actually. It was something that took place in the form of a dream. It was more of a preparation for the Prophet to receive divine revelation, etc., etc. I'm just giving some insinuations. Otherwise, I'll advise you to please look up those lectures or the write-ups.
Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khairan.
So, Dr. Saleem, I have a couple of questions here. So there's a question there. What if the cosmetic surgery requires exposing the aura, like BBL or breast enlargement?
I mean, I think again, this is something which is again left to the modesty of the person. Enlargement or BBL, all these. I mean, this is something that the reason, of course, if the intention behind is for your own husband and not for anyone else. If the spouse is doing something merely to create or sustain that appeal for the husband or for the wife, depending on who is doing what. It doesn't seem to be anything wrong. But if the intention is something else, for example, if you're going to indulge in something else because of that thing that you're doing, then that, of course, is that would be called to question. Otherwise, if these things are being done for the spouses themselves, or they're going to remain between them, they should be treated as a medical condition. And just as there are times in which men do operate on women to deliver babies, I mean, that should be treated in this way, that the treatment itself cannot be objected to, unless, of course, if the intention of that treatment is not that arrangement between the spouses, but it has some other ulterior motive, then that would not be correct.
Oh. Okay. So I have another question in the chat. If there are two different prayer times at two different mosques, are we allowed to follow one mosque, and can we go? Or
yes,
can we go
absolutely.
to both depending on
convenience? No, I mean, if you would like to pray twice, that's entirely your choice. It'll be rewarding, of course, but you can follow any of the two times, because you see, the prayers that we have been taught, the Asr prayer, the Zohar prayer, there's a start time and there's an end time, and in between you have a lot of leeway. So there are some mosques who take the middle ground, some mosques who are tilted towards the end times, others who are tilted towards the beginning time. So these are like the options that you have. So they are well within the options that have been given to you, and you can choose any one of them.
Okay. So Dr. Saleem, it seems a lot of things that we talked about today, a lot of it has to do with common sense, it seems. We've been given free will, but the common sense is there to make those judgments. That seems to be the
yes, but one thing that we have to understand is that in spite of having the free will and to make and pronounce our judgment, we also have a conscience. So at times when we make a decision or take a decision through our common sense, then it should not be something that is against our conscience. I mean, most of the time our common sense is in line or in harmony with what we think morally. Our conscience compass is aligned with it. But if ever we come to a conclusion which is in conflict with our conscience, then it would mean that it is something wrong somewhere.
So is the conscience basically, just to understand this, could it be the promise that God took from us in the beginning? Like, you know how we say that in fitrat we know what is wrong and right, like a rose will smell beautiful and filth will not. So is that something that is put in humans from the beginning, just so,
yes,
you know, at the day of judgment?
So just as the concept of God was ingrained in us before we were sent in this world, the awareness of good and evil is also innately found in us, which means that we are aware of right and wrong by birth. It's only the question of getting mentally mature enough to have that that faculty manifest itself. So it's not something that we acquire from our society or we learn from our parents or the Quran. We already have it. It's just a question of it expressing itself at the right age.
Right. So I have a few minutes left. If somebody has a question, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to be ending the session. So if there are any questions, we have an open forum, either regarding the passage we studied today or just a general question. If you have something, please raise your hand right now. Otherwise, I will be ending the session. Dr. Saleem, it seems that we have no more questions at this time. Okay. And if just to clarify, that Dr. Ghamidi has given a beautiful, explanation of that first meeting between the angel Gabriel and the Prophet Muhammad. If you want to just see
Correct.
that, then that'll answer your question. That's for whoever asked that. So yeah, Dr. Saleem, I'll be ending the session. I don't think we have any questions at this time.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. It was a wonderful session. Thank you,
Good.
Dr. Saleem. Okay, see you next
Thank
week.
you.